Before we begin, let me ask you a question. Have you ever followed a story where it felt like the protagonist was just a leaf in the wind with no drive of their own? Or one where the villain had no greater ambition other than power for the sake of power? Usually these aren't very compelling, but why is that? I would argue that it is because they do not have enough characterization. They don't feel like people. That isn't to say that simple characters don't have a place, they absolutely do. But even the simplest of characters have some depth to them. A reason why they act the way they act, a reason why they love or hate things, and, crucially, a reason why they are who they are. As a writer, it's easy to consider your characters only through the lens of what they need to do in the story, or, conversely, what the story needs them to do to move the plot forward. This, in turn, often leads to missed opportunities, overlooking all the little things that make a character human and believable. It reduces them from a who to a that. They become that thing that moves the plot forward, not the brave young girl defying the monsters of the dark forests by herself to save her older brother who's been there for her entire life. Let's explore that a little further. Let's call this character Lisa. We want the audience to understand why she would be willing to put herself in danger to save her big brother. How do we do that? Well, we can show their bond. Let's plonk Lisa and her brother down by a river. Her brother teaches her how to tie a fishing hook to a line, first by showing her, then by letting her try. She gets it wrong a couple of times, and each time she fails, he encourages her to try again, but he doesn't just tie the knot for her. By the end, she can tie a good knot by herself. He then shows her how to bait the hook using a piece of corn, and points to a good spot for her to cast her line. The moment ends as we see the two watching the bobber, bobbing along on the water's surface, Lisa with a look of excitement on her face next to her proud older brother. This is just one single short scene that I came up with off the top of my head as I sat down to write the script for this episode. I'm not trying to suggest it's the most complex thing ever, but in this hypothetical story where we see this scene, we see things that make them human. In particular, we see a connection, one between siblings, that appears to be very strong. We see one of them, Lisa, overcoming a challenge with her brother by her side. Yes, it's a tiny everyday challenge and the stakes are small, but it's these little gestures we often bond over in real life. Moments of good teaching, kindness, and the memories formed by sharing a beautiful day down by the river. If you want to give your characters depth, you need to give them these things. Of course, you don't have to do it in this exact way, that would be silly. Remember, this was just one very specific example. Let's have a look at the thing every focal character should have though, a life outside the story. For your character to feel like a person, it's important that they have a life outside of the plot. They need to have motivations, ambitions, things that they love or hate, things they fear, doubts and convictions. We all have them, and we need to see them in order to identify with a character, in order to feel for them and with them. It's these traits and beliefs that then shape how the audience perceives the adventure the character is going on. Consider Sam from the Fellowship of the Ring. In Peter Jackson's adaptation, there's a scene where he comes to a complete halt shortly after he and Frodo set off from their home. He says that with one more step, he'll be farther from home than he's ever been. This one simple line tells you a lot about Sam. It tells you that he isn't widely traveled, perhaps not much of the adventurous type. He feels a great enough sense of doubt to stop dead in his tracks right there. He doesn't really want to go. He's not obviously bold or brave on the surface, but despite his misgivings, he does take that next step on the journey with his friend Frodo. A journey that ultimately sees him squaring off against ringwraiths, trolls, goblins, Shelob, and hauling his exhausted friend up the side of Mount Doom itself, despite he himself being battered and worn. It's the fact that he's just a humble hobbit of the Shire that makes Sam's journey so compelling, and why he comes across as so brave. If he were just a generic hero, if he didn't have the background he does, His heroism wouldn't be exceptional, it would be expected. If he didn't have any background at all, the audience would have no context as to why he's doing what he's doing, why it is special, or why they should care. Sam has fears and failings, like his inability to swim, but he faces those fears and failings and takes them on for his friend Frodo. This is what makes Sam such a universally beloved character. His friendship with Frodo, his bravery in the face of terrible things, and his resilience. By that same token, extending this to Frodo is why it's so easy to empathize with him. He's just a very ordinary person who has taken on an extraordinary, terrible burden, that of being the ring bearer. He did so because he felt compelled to by a sense of duty. He might not understand the full extent of that burden, but he takes it on all the same. Alright, enough about me rambling about Sam and Frodo. Let's translate this to some actionable points to make your characters feel real. Never forget that you're writing a who, not a that. This is a person, one with fears, wants, needs, relationships, bonds, all these little things that you need to find opportunities to express. Give Sam a moment to voice his hesitation. Give Lisa a moment with her brother so that the audience can see why he means something to her. Give people reasons to care. Could you simply say, go help your friend, or go save your brother? Sure, yeah, you can do that, but think about it. Other than the surface layer of helping a friend or a sibling, there's nothing there. Nothing for your audience to latch onto or feel anything about. You're not giving them a reason to care for that friend or that brother. You're not helping the audience understand why Lisa cares for her brother. And if the audience doesn't understand why she cares, why should they? It's not their own brother after all. This applies to antagonists too. Give the audience a reason to root for their downfall. Give their motivation some depth. If they want power, power itself shouldn't be the end goal. What do they actually want to achieve with that power? Is their motivation perhaps something that can resonate with the audience, where the means of fulfilling that ambition different? By doing these things, you stand a good chance of creating characters that your audience can connect to, and even if they can't, they can at least understand them. I don't get this whole sibling thing, but I can see why Lisa's brother means a lot to her. That sort of thing. To conclude this first episode, no writer's advice is ever perfect or applicable across the board. Depending on what you're writing, you might need to stick with simpler, more surface-level storytelling, and that might genuinely be the better call from time to time. This comes down to what I like to call narrative bandwidth, which I'll be talking about in the next episode. Well, assuming that this, my first ever crack at writing and narrating one, doesn't land more poorly than a concrete bird at a skydiving co-coordinated swimming biathlon. That's it for now. Hopefully, I'll see you next time.